Hi, I'm Josh Allen from PSC Motorsports, and today we're putting a steering kit on this F-550. Alright, so our first step, we need to secure the steering wheel so we don't break a clock spring. I always like to hook it onto the seat frame. Alright, so now we have our steering wheel secure. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step, disassemble on the gearbox side. See you there. So, first thing we gotta do, we gotta put this front axle up on jack stands so we get the tires off, so we can get to the gearbox and get everything easier access. So let's go ahead and throw it up on jack stands and pull those tires off. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pull the other side off, but this is so that you can gain access to your steering gear. So we're going to remove any aftermarket stabilizers attached to the tie rod. So you're going to pry up the inner fender so that you can access the high pressure and low pressure lines. They're 18 millimeter. Alright, now you're going to loosen the high pressure and the low pressure line to the gearbox. So now that you've popped off the high pressure and low pressure line off the gearbox, you're going to let it sit there and drain for a minute, at least until the fluid stops flowing out. Biggest part of that is make sure that you don't make a bigger mess than you have to. So right here we're going to disconnect the steering shaft from the gearbox. Alright, so our next step, we're going to go ahead and get the drag glean off the Pitman arm so we can drop out the gearbox. And I will put the nut on backwards when I go to pop this out. There she goes. Alright, so now that we popped that loose, let's go ahead and pull our nut off. You're going to have to pick it up and twist it to get it out of the way. But now that we have that loose, I'm going to go ahead and put the nut back on just to protect the threads. But now we're ready to drop out our steering gear. So grab your trusty buddy to zap off the gear while somebody catches it. So you got the 2 bolts out of the gearbox, you're working on your third. I always suggest to get a buddy to catch the gearbox because it's not fun trying to catch it and unbolt it by yourself. So I like to say grab a strong friend, trick them into getting under there and catching the gear while you zap it out. You ready? We're almost there.
Yeah.
All right, we are free. All right, so now we're ready to drop out the steering gear. All right. Go ahead, I got it. Okay. So now you got your steering gear out. Let's go ahead and swap the Pitman arm onto our new box. All right, so our first step, we're going to get the Pitman arm off here. So we're going to grab our trusty rusty 46 millimeter socket, zap that nut off there, and let's get that Pitman arm off. There she is. So now we're going to gently move that gear out of the way while we set up our new gear. So, a couple small things before we get started on this. If you'll notice right here on your hydraulic assist ports, you have two O-rings, and these are to replace the O-rings for the factory lines that you retain. So let's go ahead and pop that off. And I also always like to loosen the cylinder assist caps before we get the gearbox in the truck, because it makes it a lot easier to have those loose before you install it. Because we do have those very tight from factory. In case you do not go cylinder assist, those caps will not leak. But let's go ahead, pull off the washer, and let's get ready to put the Pitman arm on. Make sure you put it in the same orientation that it came off. And with this Pitman arm, it should not be hard, because if you see right here, we have a keyway, and there's only one keyway. So the Pitman arm can only go on one way. I always like to give it just a couple taps to get it started. And then it comes with a supplied lock washer. Go ahead and put your lock washer on there. And your new nut. Let's go ahead and zap it down, and then we'll get you a torque spec. After you get it on there and nice and tight, we'll torque it down. But before we install it into the truck, I always like to, there's a red line on the case and on the sector shaft right there you see. I always like to line those up so you know where center is on the gearbox. So now we set our torque wrench to 240. Let's go ahead and torque it. So on every gearbox from PSC Motorsports, it should have a little red zip tie with two little O-rings on it. And those O-rings are for if you retain your factory lines, you go ahead and remove the little O-ring off the factory line and go ahead and replace it and reinstall the factory lines. When you're preparing to install the gear, I always like to remove the high pressure and low pressure line out of the way, so as you're installing the gear, they don't hang you up, and it's a nice clean install. So after you've wiggled the gearbox up into place, you have your buddy start the first bolt, have him ready, and have somebody under the truck still so you can get the gearbox lined up for the next one. Get them finger tight, make sure all the bolts are nice tight and started, and then let's torque them down to spec. So you always want to start your bolts for your gearbox by hand. So that you're not cross-setting or damaging any threads. And what I'll usually do is run one of the bottom ones mostly down so it's nice and secure, and then your buddy can wiggle the gearbox so you can get the other two started. And now that you have all three started and ran down, then you'll grab your torque wrench and torque them to spec. Now I'll swap to my impact, zap them down, and then swap to a torque wrench to get everything to torque spec. All right, now we're going to grab our torque wrench. Now we got our torque wrench to set to 150. We're going to go ahead and torque it to spec. All right, so now we can tighten up this 13 millimeter for your brake. All right, so now our gearbox is installed. Now all we have to do is install the steering shaft to the input and our hoses, so our high pressure and our return line to the gearbox, and the gearbox is installed.
All right, so now we're going to reinstall our high pressure and our low pressure factory lines into our gearbox. Now we're going to reinstall our drag link into our Pitman arm. Go ahead and let that guy slide into its home, and then tighten it up. And do not install the cotter pin until the very end, just so that you're not catching it on clothes or ripping gloves or stuff like that. Just makes life a little easier.
Alright, so we're going to put together our manifold block outside the vehicle because it's way easier that way. So we're going to take our little thread sealant. We're going to put a dab on each fitting. And after we get a dab on each fitting, let's go ahead and run these in. Go ahead and tighten those up. It'd be 11/16. You just want to snug those up. You're going to go ahead and take your bolt, stick it through the middle. Now we're ready to go install this on the truck. Let's get at it.
All right, so now we're going to put some pneumatic thread sealant on it. A little drop there, little drop there. All right, so we're going to install our manifold block to our cylinder lines. So driver goes to the driver port, passenger goes to the passenger port. We'll get those guys loosely installed. We don't want to fully tighten anything until the cylinder is fully in. And now we can put our nut and our washer on the back side of our manifold block. And now we can start putting the skid plate on for the cylinder, so we can mount the cylinder, get the lines on there, get it filled up, bled, and we're pretty much ready to rock and roll right there.
So now you have this factory hose up there by your cylinder assist lines right by the gearbox. We like to rotate that clamp so that the assist lines do not touch it and do not rub a hole through it. And after that, I like to zip tie and secure the cylinder assist lines from the gearbox over to the manifold block and have them secured out of the way because they should not be moving. And after that, everything's nice and tidy.
The notch on the gearbox on the input shaft should be facing you if the bolt came out straight up. Now you should be able to take your 10 millimeter and hand it to yourself. So now you got your steering shaft onto your input of your gearbox, 1/8 of a turn at a time.
92 ratchet, and you can hear it click 2 times at a time.
All right, so before we install this bracket right here, you have to remove bolts on your diff cover. And a lot of the times we've found when we've removed those in the past, the diff cover leaks. So we go ahead and pull the diff cover off and reseal it. So we pulled these 4 bolts on the diff cover right here. And sometimes when you do that, the diff starts to leak, so you have to reseal it. This time it did not, so we do not have to reseal this diff. It saves us a little time there, but when you pull these 4 and you see it seep any which way, go ahead and pull it, reseal it, then go ahead and finish out the kit. Now we're going to go ahead and throw our bracket up onto the axle housing. Let's go ahead and start these bolts. Thing I like to do, I don't like to run all these down fully until the rest of the cylinder bracketry is on, in case you have to move anything to get it to line up. So this bracket goes right here. We want the bracket loose, so if we have to wiggle it around, we can. So now we got our cylinder. So let's go ahead and put our cylinder together. It's not really much, we just need to put the rod in on. So let's go ahead and run our jam nut down. So now we got our jam nut all the way, I like to run them all the way down. Let's get our rod in on there. Now our rod end is all the way on there. Let's go ahead and get our misalignment spacers and our bushings. We'll go ahead and stick the bushing on there. Now stick the spacer. Same thing with this side. Bushing. And it's better to try to get the Heim as lined up as you can. And after you get the Heim, we can put our misalignment spacers. And so our cylinder is now ready to be installed. So this is our cylinder. I've been calling it a cylinder. It's still a hydraulic cylinder, but our new name for this particular one is a DDS, Dynamic Dampening Stabilizer. And that's because this is not a hydraulic assist cylinder. The rod goes all the way through both sides, so you have equal pressure on either side of the cylinder. So when you're driving, you don't feel like it has more power to the right than the left. This solves that. All right, so we're going to talk about the manifold block on the cylinder now. So the fitting with the tube on it, we're going to go ahead and mark that. That's the D, that's driver side. The fitting that goes straight into the cylinder, that's the passenger side. So we're going to go ahead and put a passenger driver on there. Just so when you're installing it, makes life just a little bit easier, not having to think about it so hard. Let's get this on the truck. All right, so now go ahead and throw our cylinder up in there. So, like I said, let's throw it in there. So let's go ahead and grab our bolt. Set it right there, ready to drop in. I always like to use a little alignment bar because it just makes life just a wee bit easier. Now we can turn this big girl all the way that way. This little plastic sleeve right here, we had to cut it off because our cylinder clamp wants to go right here. So I always grab my trusty rusty knife, and It's brittle plastic, so it breaks nice and easy. Get rid of that. Now we're able to put our clamp right here. So now we can turn this big girl all the way that way. When you grab your clamp, you want to make sure the bung for the cylinder is towards the end of the tie rod. Let's go ahead and throw this guy up there. We get a couple of these little Allen bolts started. Allen. There again, when you install this, you want to loosely install it until you have the whole system in, because it's very fun to adjust after you have the whole system in. So now we have our clamp loosely installed and we can still move it and rotate it. Let's go ahead and extend the knuckle till it hits bump stop. All right, let it go back with just a hair. A little bit more, right there. And there she goes. She's on in. It is 1 1/8 for that bolt. And so on your cylinder, you can go ahead and actually fully run it down. Now you got your cylinder fully ran down. Your clamp is still loose, you gotta remember that. Your clamp stays loose until after this next step.
Now, you're going to run your lines from your manifold block down to your cylinder. On the cylinder, you'll have two fittings, right? One fitting, you'll see a metal tube going all the way over to the driver's side, right? That is the driver line. The other fitting is the passenger line. Alright, so now you have all your lines ran and you make sure everything clears, everything like that. Let's go ahead and tighten up all the lines and then tighten the manifold block to the frame. And then we'll zip tie the lines together and make sure everything looks like it's going to ride there and it looks like it's going to be happy.
All right, so let's go ahead and mount our skid plate. We're finally ready to. I typically throw a bolt in the center first because your center will locate everything else. Now, I'll go ahead and grab 2 more bolts, 2 bolts, 4 washers, and 2 nuts, and finish up on this side. All right, so now we can go ahead and do this side. And while everything's loosey-goosey.
And after we get our skid plate on there and fully tightened, let's go ahead and go around all the bolts on the diff cover, tighten those, and our 1147 bracket. On the other side, let's get everything tight and ready to rock and roll. Alright, so now we're going to zip tie our lines, our cylinder assist lines together. And I typically like to do them like spark plug wires. But after we get those lines together and after you cycle the suspension, make sure everything clears. If you need a little bit extra, I'll always zip tie them to the track bar. Alright, so we're going to install our castle nut and then we're going to install our cotter pin. Alright, so now we're ready to bleed the system.
So now we're going to start filling the system up. And we're using our True Blue Ultra Performance Power Steering Fluid. So we've put 2 power steering fluid quarts in there, and we've ran the vehicle for a minute. Now we're going to let it set for a second, and as you're letting it set, we're going to cycle the steering wheel back and forth, going from lock to lock, and your goal right there. And what I usually like to do is turn the vehicle on and off a couple of times, and we're trying to get all the air out of the bottom of the system, come up to the top, and we're trying to get all these little air bubbles out. If you see your fluid aerating, you see any bubbles, anything like that, you need to keep bleeding. Well, we just finished up our DDS power steering kit for our F-550. Drives great. I'll see you next time.